This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com with your Sunday update for this 22nd of August, 2010. And now for the real news. The establishment media has begun falling over themselves to report on the Ground Zero mosque story this week, a distraction that serves to whip up Islamophobia ahead of a possible strike on Iran, even as it further reinforces the official, government-sanctioned conspiracy theory of 9/11 that claims that the events of that day were directed over satellite phone by a man on dialysis in a cave halfway around the world, and carried out by 19 men with box cutters who flunked out of flight school on Cessna 172s. In one of the latest developments to be pounced on by the phony right-wing warmongers who only care about the protection of private property rights when it is their private property at stake, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi evoked outrage earlier this week for stating that she supported an investigation into who is funding opposition to the mosque.
There is no question that there is a concerted effort to make this a political issue by some, and I join those who have called for looking into how is this opposition to the mosque being funded.
Pelosi's suggestion backfired, however, when researchers began inquiring into who is funding the mosque itself. The results show, as expected, that the mosque is not the result of mythical al-Qaeda agents or even a grassroots Muslim effort, but is in fact being funded by the wealthy globalists who stand to benefit most from a fresh round of hysteria over bearded men in turbans. The mosque, officially known as the Cordoba House, is the work of an organization known as the Cordoba Initiative, founded by Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf. Rauf sits on the Religious Advisory Committee of the Council on Foreign Relations and World Economic Forum's Council of 100. The Cordoba Initiative receives support from the American Society for Muslim Advancement, which in turn receives its funding from the wealthy, eugenics-obsessed, tax-exempt foundations of the billionaires, including the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the Henry Luce Foundation. Another key partner of the Cordoba Initiative is the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. Some of the key support for the Mosque Initiative in the media has come from fellow CFR members. One article of support that the Cordoba Initiative links to on their blog is a favorable opinion piece in the Christian publication Sojourners, edited by Jim Wallace, who sits with Rauf on the CFR's Religious Advisory Committee. Oddly, now that these troubling connections are being unearthed by the alternative media, mosque employees are reticent to talk about where the project is receiving its funding from.
Well, one question that a lot of people want answered that nobody's answering is where is the funding coming from for the mosque?
The funding will come from Muslims throughout the world. And, you know, that's just a private matter. It's not necessary for people to disclose who the contributors are. It could be contributors on a personal level, or it could be contributors from corporations, or it could be contributors from other businesses, or it could be contributors from other countries. It could come from several sources, but that's really not important.
Watch for the establishment media to continue hyping the construction of the mosque as long as possible, while fastidiously ignoring the question of where the mosque is receiving its funding. Also watch for the media to continue dutifully ignoring the question of what the Council on Foreign Relations is, and what purpose it serves in creating the foreign policy of the United States.
Rockefeller's influence also extends to the current administration. He was chairman emeritus of the CFR when Vice President Dick Cheney once served as a director, a relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
In related news, declassified documents from the National Archives and Records Administration confirm what many have long suspected, namely that the Israeli lobby in America has been covertly funding a program aimed at placing pro-Zionist articles in major magazines, cultivating Israeli-friendly editors, and suppressing the reporting of issues potentially embarrassing to Israel, including the Dimona nuclear weapons facility and the Lavon affair. Grant Smith, the director of the Institute for Research on Middle Eastern Policy, appeared on RT this week to talk about what the documents reveal.
These files are from a sealed Senate investigation, which was the result of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the U.S. Department of Justice looking into groups that brought $36 million into the U.S. to plant stories in the U.S. media and promote Israeli foreign policy objectives in the United States. They're extremely relevant because they revealed, for example, a vast effort to divert U.S. attention from the Israeli Dimona nuclear weapons facility by saying it was merely a research center. They carefully tracked how that story was playing in the U.S. media. And they also were using outlets such as The Atlantic magazine, funneling $50,000 into that magazine in a major effort to disrupt a U.S. peace proposal, which would have involved bringing some Palestinian refugees and allowing them to return to their homes and properties in Israel.
Perhaps not coincidentally, The Atlantic magazine is now one of the publications that is spearheading the current effort to encourage America to attack Iran. In the latest issue of The Atlantic, a cover story written by a dual Israeli-US citizen who just happens to be a former member of the Israeli Defense Force, argues that Iran poses the greatest threat since Hitler and needs to be bombed right away. This is not by any means the first time that undue Israeli influence over American foreign policy has been raised. In November of 2001, Fox News' Carl Cameron reported on Israeli spying on the US and the fact that American investigators knew about Israeli foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
This information further corroborates the story of the Israelis who were seen setting up and filming the strike on the World Trade Center prior to the attack on the morning of 9/11 and congratulating each other afterwards. These Israelis were taken in by the FBI for questioning and deported on immigration charges, and in November 2001 they appeared on an Israeli talk show to admit their part in documenting the attack.
And at that point we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
The 5 Israelis were detained for 10 weeks and finally deported on immigration violations after the FBI cleared them of any involvement in 9/11.
It remains to be seen whether The Atlantic will address how their magazine was compromised by the Israeli lobbyists, and whether any major establishment media will investigate or even report on this groundbreaking story. Finally this week, Apple is coming under scrutiny for the increasingly Orwellian nature of its products and ideas. A recent article in the Chicago Sun-Times revealed some of the information that iPhones store about their users and their activities, proclaiming that this is a good thing for law enforcement. Among the police-friendly iPhone features cited in the article are the fact that the iPhone takes a screenshot every time a user closes out of the built-in mapping application, the fact that all iPhone photos include the GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken in the metadata, and the data trails stored by the applications that allow police to track where a user has gone online. The phone also caches a log of keystrokes, ostensibly to learn how to autocorrect a user's typing mistakes, but this cache can be used by police to recover deleted emails, texts, passwords, and other sensitive information. Even more worryingly, Apple is now actively pursuing patents on biometric technologies that it hopes to incorporate into future iterations of the iPhone or iPad that will record users' photographs or even their heartbeat in order to ensure that their device is not being broken into. Biometrics is the scientific measurement of physiological features in order to identify a person individually. One of the oldest biometric signatures to be used by police in solving crimes is fingerprint analysis, a technique that was pioneered by Charles Galton, the man who also coined the term eugenics, and who believed in eradicating the inferior classes in order to ensure that the rich and powerful can thrive. Millions of people surrender biometric details every day without even realizing that they are willingly becoming part of an Orwellian tracking control grid. Examples of biometrics in everyday life include fingerprinting in order to enter Disney World, employers who make employees punch in and out with a palm print scan instead of a punch card, and naked body scanners at airports that are storing precise, detailed, 360-degree biometric photographs of travelers' naked bodies. Now, software developers for Apple devices are getting on board with the biometric idea, with PerSay launching Vocal Password, an application that stores a voice print of the device's user for authentication purposes. It remains to be seen whether these worrying developments will in any way hinder the seemingly unstoppable Apple juggernaut, or if organized consumer resistance to the coming police state control grid will be enough to stop Orwell's worst fears from being realized. Now please go to CorbettReport.com to download episode 143 of the Corbett Report, More Truth Music, where we talk to DJ Chris Gio and Cherie of TruthFrequencyRadio.com, the members of the Australian folk rock band Black Hats, and independent hip-hop artist Ricardo Renteria about truth music and reversing the lies of mainstream pop culture.